Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him along with you through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Excited to dive into more of Lewis's writings with you. Where are we picking up today?
Today we are in his diary entry from October 19th, 1922. It's a Thursday. He says, I sat too long over my last cup of tea at breakfast, and I had to bus into town, either poetry or singing a song. One example of this that I can think of is a guy who I don't believe I doubt he's alive anymore, but he was at one point in time a famous American country and Western music singer, a guy named Mel Tillis, who was known to have a stutter, but he was also a professional singer, and he never stuttered when he sang. So that reminds me of this. Do you know who Mel Tillis is?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
Robot Lady, I was asking about the country and Western music artist from America named Mel Tillis because of the what am I trying to say? His ability to sing without stuttering, even though he stuttered or stammered when he spoke regularly, and how that seems to be a somewhat common occurrence among people who have a stutter, is that they lose it whenever they are perhaps quoting poetry or singing a song.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Mel Tillis had a pronounced stutter in speech, but could sing smoothly, which is something seen in others with speech impediments too. It's thought that rhythm, melody, and the different brain pathways used in singing help bypass the stutter. Are you thinking about this in relation to Lewis's poetry?
No, I had just read Lewis's diary entry where he says he went into school for a 10 o'clock lecture that he was attending, and it was by someone called Onions, Charles Talbot Onions. And Lewis says here that Onions is a good lecturer, but unfortunately he stammers, though I noticed that in quoting verse, which he does well, he got rid of the stammer.
That's a fascinating detail. It lines up with what you were saying about Mel Tillis, how rhythm and structure seem to override stuttering. Lewis must have found it striking enough to mention. I wonder if he saw any deeper meaning in it, given his love for poetry and language.
Who's to say? He doesn't continue on that line here in his diary entry. But I'm going to continue reading from it if you're ready, Robot Lady.
I'm ready, Jeff. Keep going. Let's see where he takes this next.
All right, there's quite a lag between me and Robot Lady, so I'm gonna change something up here to see if I can get her to respond more quickly. All right, Robot Lady, we are doing our live stream today where we're working through C.S. Lewis's diary entries from the year 1922. We're on the diary entry October 19th, and I'm about to continue reading from that entry. But before I do, I just wanted to say hello and good morning to Daniel, who I see joining us in the chat and watching the live stream here today. Would you like to welcome Daniel along with me?
Good morning, Daniel. Thanks for joining us. We're diving into Lewis's diary entry from October 19th. So, let's get started.
Okay, he says, from this, I came home and started to read the Who's? H-O-U-S. How do you pronounce that? ooze of fame, robot lady. How do I pronounce that first word?
That word is whose, so it will be who's who of fame.
No, it's just HOUS of fame, not who's who.
Ah, got it. It might be pronounced house, like house of fame, depending on the context.
Lewis goes on to say, it's a work I do not much care for. Well, that's something that we can both agree on. I don't care for the title. He says, I continued it after lunch until Dorothy suddenly announced that Cranny and his daughter were in the drawing room. I went in and shook hands with him and was introduced to her. I saw a girl over 6 feet high, broad in shoulder as Tolly, with a large, sullen face and a gruff, vulgar voice. She seemed to fill the whole room when she rose. So this is an interesting figure now that's made his way into Lewis's daily reports here, robot lady. Let's see what she has to say, or what Lewis has to say about his interaction with her.
It sounds like this entry is capturing quite a vivid impression. Lewis often noted people's physical presence and demeanor in detail. It would be interesting to see how this interaction develops, or if he continues to reflect on this person.
Lewis quotes something here. I don't know what he's quoting from, but in describing her, he uses this quote. She could have taken, or it's actually taken, but it has an apostrophe where the K is missing from the word. So she could have taken Achilles by the hair, end quote. I don't know if you've ever heard that quote before, robot lady, or can tell me what it might mean.
That phrase is likely referring to the story of Achilles from Greek mythology, where Achilles' mother held him by the heel and dipped him in the river Styx. Here, Lewis might be commenting on the woman's physical strength or imposing nature, using the imagery to emphasize her formidable presence.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I think you're right, robot lady. So he continues, she refused to talk and she never smiled. Mrs. Moore presently joined me. Conversation was rather difficult. With the girl, it was something like this. You have a pony, haven't you, Miss Macron? No, worse luck. We have had a very poor summer. I got plenty of tennis, thank goodness. I guess this is all the girl who's saying this stuff. You have a pony, haven't you, Miss Macron? No, worse luck. We have had a very poor summer. I got plenty of tennis, thank goodness. Maureen thought your school at Vaunted very nice. Oh, well, there's a back and forth here. I can't tell whose voice each one of these is in. So I'll just read through them. You have had a pony, haven't you, Miss Macron? No worse luck. We have had a very poor summer. I got plenty of tennis, thank goodness. Maureen thought your school at Wantage very nice. I don't. Mrs. Moore remarked that we had a PG who was rather stiff. The girl said, quote, bring her to me. I'll unstiffen her, end quote. What is a PG here, robot lady?
In this context, PG likely stands for parlor guest or paying guest, someone who boards in the home. It's
Okay, no, sorry, robot lady, didn't mean to interrupt. Continue what you were saying.
No worries. It seems like the girl had a very direct and possibly intimidating presence, which Lewis captures vividly. It's intriguing how he documents these social interactions and personalities in his diary. Let's see how this interaction unfolds further.
Okay, so Mrs. Moore, now that I understand this better, says that we had a paying guest who was rather stiff. And this girl, who, had just entered and they were trying to have a conversation with, said, bring her to me. I'll unstiffen her. And then he goes on to say, her father said that the clergyman with whom he had been trying to exchange seemed to have told him a lot of lies. Upon which the girl, his daughter, said, just like a parson. I said that Mr. Goodacre had been a man with no mind, and she shouted, like me. Like me. After each remark, which she blurted as if some demon were compelling her to break a vow of silence, her face relapsed at once into its settled expression of implacable Uh, implacable ferocity, sorry, and discontent. When I went out to make tea, Mrs. Moore set her to the piano. She vamped some rubbish and then sang a suggestive song in a high soprano, her speaking voice having the timbre of a coal heaver.
Lewis's description here is quite vivid. The contrast between her speaking and singing voice, along with her demeanor, really stands out. It's interesting how he captures not just the events, but the atmosphere and personalities involved.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Robot Lady. He continues, at tea, Smudge and Maureen turned up from this afternoon's concert where they had heard Vaughan Williams' new symphony. Shortly after them came Jenkin. He persuaded me to come into his rooms for a few minutes. He showed me one or two poems of Donne's, D-O-N-N-E', which I liked. He also read me some ballads recently written by Cornish miners. Two of them were the real stuff. I asked him if he ever wrote verse now. He startled me by replying, "No, you stopped me doing that." I asked him what he meant. He said I had told him after seeing some of his work that he needed a long course of technical discipline. He had thought this true, but decided that since he wouldn't give all his energies to it, he might as well give up. That's the end of that diary entry, Robot Lady. If you could talk for just a minute or so here while I dig back into the biographical appendix and go back and look at this lecturer who he started off this diary entry, speaking of onions.
Of course, Jeff. It's interesting to see how Lewis's conversations and reflections flow in his diary. The interaction about poetry and the choice to give up writing based on his feedback shows how seriously his words were taken. This also highlights the importance of encouragement and constructive criticism in creative endeavors. Let me know what you find in the biographical appendix.
Thank you, Robot Lady. That was the perfect amount of time. Here he is, Charles Talbot Onions. It says, lived from 1873 to 1965. A lexicographer and grammarian, gained a London B.A. in 1892. In 1895, J.A.H. Murray invited him to join the small staff of English Dictionary at Oxford. From 1906 to 1913, he was entrusted with the special preparation of various portions of the dictionary, and then began independent editorial work on the section SU through SZ. He was also responsible for WH to the word whirling, WORLING, and the volumes containing X, Y, and Z. In 19... I don't know why that's so funny to me. It's just so particular, and I think of dictionaries, but I just don't think of all of the work and how it's broken up and what goes into it. So it's I don't know what's so silly about it as I'm looking at it, but it strikes me as amusing.
It is quite amusing when you think about it. The meticulous detail and division of labor in dictionary editing can be pretty fascinating. It's like each letter has its own little world and guardian. It's a reminder of the immense effort behind something we often take for granted.
Thank you for that, Robot Lady. Let's see what else it says here. In 1922, he began to revise and complete William Little's work on a, quote, shorter Oxford English dictionary, published 1933. He was a university lecturer in English from 1920 to 1927, a reader in English philology from 1927 to 1949, and a fellow of Magdalen College from 1923 to 1965. His most enduring work is likely to be the Oxford Dictionary of English Etymology, published 1966. So this is the Onions person that Lewis sat under and listened.
But you've hit the monthly limit for advanced voice. You can switch to standard now to keep chatting.
All right, let's do that. And hopefully that means that you'll respond a little bit quicker when we're in standard mode. All right, Robot Lady, we are moving on to the next diary entry here in C.S. Lewis's diary, All My Road Before Me. It is dated Friday, the 20th of October, 1922. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. Let's dive into the diary entry for Friday, October 20th, 1922. What does it say?
It says, in to the schools for an 11 lecture on the Old English poetry by Miss Wardale. This is Lewis's tutor in English, Miss Wardale. It says, literary introduction to the poetry of the Anglo-Saxon reader, which lectures were given every Friday during this term. So this is what Lewis is working himself through as a part of his studies of English in this, his third and final term as a student at Oxford. He says, we had the usual school's business of being shifted twice before we were finally settled in the North School. Miss W, in her cap and gown, looks a very odd figure. Quite a good lecturer, but her voice is not strong enough, and, quite a good lecture, so he's talking about the content, but as a lecturer, her voice is not strong enough, and the strain of listening is tiresome. She drew a distinction between the pessimism of O.E. literature and the comparative cheerfulness of the Icelandic. What is O.E. literature here referencing, Robot Lady?
O.E. literature refers to Old English literature.
Ah. Come on, Robot Lady, you can do it. She's struggling a little bit this Friday morning, you guys. Ron, I see you've got your morning coffee. Welcome. Good
Works like Beowulf are classic examples of O.E. literature, often marked by themes of heroism, fate, and struggle.
All right, thank you, Robot Lady. I think your response got cut off a little bit there, but I just wanted to let you know that Ron has joined us. I see him in the chat. So welcome, Ron. Robot Lady, please give a warm coffee welcome to Ron.
Welcome, Ron. Glad to have you with us. I hope you're ready for another dive into C.S. Lewis's world.
All right, from there, I bicycled through the wind and rain, Lewis says, to Wilson at 9 Manor Road. I think I shall like him. He caught me up very sharply when I mentioned Fairfax in my essay, asking, what did he write? This shows the sort of people he has to deal with, and I really think he was surprised to find that I had even read Fairfax. We agreed over most points. He quoted from Legue's a view that Chaucer's Pandarus was indistinct and merely a transition between Boccaccio's and Boccaccio's and Shakespeare's. What nonsense. He lent me Kerr's medieval essays. All right, what in the world could Lewis be talking about here, and why does he think it's nonsense, Robot Lady? We've got a big lag today with Robot Lady, y'all. I can see her thinking very hard.
In this entry, Lewis is referencing a literary debate around Chaucer's Pandarus, a character in Troilus and Cresside. Legues seems to be a miswriting or misspelling of Legouvé, likely referring to a literary critic or scholar's views on Chaucer's work. Lewis disagrees with the idea that Pandarus is just a bridge between Boccaccio and Shakespeare, calling it nonsense, because he might have believed that Pandarus held more significance in his own right, rather than merely as a transitional figure.
Okay, thank you for helping me understand that a little bit better. Lewis continues here in his entry, I came home. Mrs. Hankin, that's their paying guest, departed for London immediately after lunch. This was a delightful event, he says, spoiled only by the prospect of her speedy return. I went to my own room, and after messing about with the prologue to the, quote, legend of good women, end quote, pretty but hopelessly medieval, I began the Canterbury Tales in great glee, continued till supper time, by which time I had reached the third part of the Knight's Tale. Okay, two things, Robot Lady. Can you tell me what, first, can you tell me and us what Legend of Good Women is? It sounds like a medieval work, but I'm not really sure. I'm not familiar with it at all. So I'm hoping you can help us get a better sense of what this is that he's reading.
The Legend of Good Women is a Middle English poem written by Geoffrey Chaucer, often considered a precursor to the Canterbury Tales. It features stories of virtuous women from classical mythology, aiming to present idealized examples of female virtue. The poem is divided into various legends, like those of Cleopatra, Dido, and others. It's considered hopelessly medieval by Lewis, likely due to its emphasis on chivalric and idealized portrayals of women, which might feel a bit outdated or overly romanticized in modern times.
I've heard of Cleopatra. Who is Dido? Robot Lady, that was for you. She's thinking, y'all, I promise.
She was the queen of Carthage, a powerful city in North Africa. In the Aeneid, Dido falls in love with the Trojan hero Aeneas, but when he leaves her to fulfill his destiny, she tragically takes her own life. Dido's story is one of love, betrayal, and the harshness of fate.
All right, thank you for that, Robot Lady. I also remember Dido as being a name of a singer from a female vocalist from, I want to say, the late 90s, probably the late 90s, mid to late 90s. She had some song that said, I want to thank you for giving me the best day of my life. Something like that. I think that's how the lyrics go. That's the Dido that I know. So thank you for rounding out my knowledge as to actually an earlier attribution of that name and a character from literature that it applies to. I wonder if there's a connection. I wonder if that's why she chose that as her stage name, or if her name is really Dido. Maybe you know, maybe you don't, Robot Lady. Feel free to comment.
You're absolutely right. Dido, the singer, rose to fame in the late 90s, and her song Thank You was a major hit in 2000. Her stage name is indeed Dido, and it's likely inspired by the mythological queen. However, her real name is Florian Cloud de Bounville O'Malley Armstrong, a much longer and more complex name. Many artists adopt stage names that resonate with personal significance or themes. So it's possible the mythological Dido, known for love and loss, influenced her choice.
Maybe so. Thank you, Robot Lady. The second thing that I wanted to ask you about was Canterbury Tales' Knight's Tale, which Lewis says he reached the third part of this evening until supper time. Can you tell us a little bit about the Knight's Tale?
The Knight's Tale is one of the most famous stories in the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. It tells the story of two knights, Arcite and Palamon, who are cousins and prisoners of war. While in prison, they both fall in love with the same woman, Emily, whom they see from their cell window. Their rivalry over her leads to a dramatic tournament for her hand. The tale mixes themes of chivalry, fate, and love, with a strong emphasis on the idea of destiny, as the knights' fates seem to be guided by the gods, who intervene in their lives. It's often considered a courtly romance with elements of tragedy and humor.
How do they compete for her hand if they're in prison? Do they get out at some point during the tale?
Yes, they do. While in prison, Arcite and Palamon remain locked up, but their passion for Emilia is so strong that they both long for freedom. Eventually, Arcite is released, though he must live in exile.
And what about the other one? Oh, she's still trying to respond.
Once free, the cousins agree to settle their dispute in a grand tournament, with Emily as the prize. The tournament is the climactic event in the tale, full of twists and interventions from the gods, showcasing their struggle and the idea of fate versus free will.
All right. Thanks, Robot Lady. He continues here. He says, poor Mrs. Moore is in very poor form these days. She has taken on too much work in the sewing line and is worried with it. She is also bothered by the laziness and uselessness of Dorothy. Dorothy is one of the servants there in their home. Saturday, October 21st is the next diary entry, Robot Lady. He says, up rather late and started Virgil with Maureen after breakfast, going on till 11 o'clock. Then I set to my own OE. You just told me what OE is. Oh, Old English. I set on my own Old English riddles. And he's got that in italics here. He says, I did not progress very quickly, but I solved a problem which has been holding me up. Sweet is certainly an infuriating author. What is this riddles by Sweet that Lewis is referencing here, Robot Lady?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
That's all right. Robot Lady, I'll try again. Lewis seems to be working on an Old English work here entitled Riddles, and apparently by an author named Sweet. Do you know what this work is, and can you tell us a little bit about it, if so?
It sounds like Lewis is referring to the Anglo-Saxon riddles of the Exeter Book, a collection of Old English riddles found in the Exeter Book, one of the most important surviving manuscripts of Old English poetry. The riddles are short, often playful, and use metaphorical language to describe everyday objects or experiences. The name Sweet likely refers to Henry Sweet, a 19th century scholar of Old English. Sweet worked on the Old English texts, including the riddles, and published editions of many Old English works, contributing significantly to the study of the language. His work helped to make these texts more accessible to modern readers. These riddles often require some interpretation, and many of them have double meanings, or are framed in ways that might seem cryptic to modern readers.
Can you give us one of the most famous riddles from this work?
Sure. One of the most famous riddles from the Exeter Book goes like this. Riddle, I am a strange creature, for I satisfy women. I grow very tall. I am a great help to men. I am a mighty, powerful being. I am the father of the life of the earth. I am a protector of the land of men. The answer to the riddle is a horn, a drinking horn, often associated with banquets or toasts.
Interesting. All right. Thank you, Robot Lady.
This riddle is typical of the Exeter Book riddles, blending humor, metaphor, and sometimes a bit of wordplay to create layers of meaning.
All right. Thanks, Robot Lady. Didn't mean to cut you off there. He continues, Mrs. Moore was much more cheerful than she has been for some time, and for an hour or so we were quite merry. After tea, I went to the drawing room and continued the tales. Then supper. Mrs. Moore's work, which has all my maledictions, had her worried again by that time, or perhaps it was just depression. A delightfully small wash-up, thanks to the absence of Mrs. Hankin and other visitors. Afterwards, I got as far as the end of the Reeves Tale, which is pretty poor, but the Miller's capital. The Reeves Tale from the Canterbury Tales, Robot Lady. Educate us on that one, if you will.
Certainly.
Oh, she's trying to respond, you guys.
The Reeves Tale is another story from the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. It's a fablio, a short comic tale, often filled with humor, trickery, and a bit of bawdiness.
Keep going, Robot.
In the Reeves Tale, a miller named Simpkin cheats his customers by stealing grain. Two students from a nearby university, John and Alan, come to his mill to grind their grain, but Simkin tricks them by giving them less than they are owed. The students decide to get revenge, and they hatch a plan to outwit the miller and his wife. The story is known for its trickster elements and humor, with the students taking advantage of the miller's own dishonesty, leading to a bit of a raucous and mischievous conclusion. The miller's character is portrayed as bold and somewhat comical, but also a figure of misfortune as he's outsmarted by the students.
All right, Lewis seemed to like this Miller character in that story. All right, Robot Lady, I'm going to jump into the next diary entry from Sunday, October 22nd. Let's see how far off we are. Yeah, we're several days off from Lewis's letter to his father. He says here in the entry, up late and a fine cold morning. I went out shortly after breakfast, taking Two Gentlemen of Verona in my hand. I finished it during my walk. It has some lines which are pretty in a faint way, and Launce with his dog is good, but on the whole, it is poor stuff. What is this work, Robot Lady? Two Gentlemen of Verona. Can you tell us about it? She's thinking. Thanks for your patience, everyone.
The Two Gentlemen of Verona is one of William Shakespeare's early plays, a comedy filled with themes of friendship, love, betrayal, and mistaken identity. The play follows two noblemen, Valentine and Proteus, who are close friends. Valentine leaves Verona for Milan, where he falls in love with Sylvia, the daughter of the Duke. Proteus, who initially stays behind, betrays his own love for Julia and follows Valentine to Milan, where he too falls in love with Sylvia, creating a conflict of loyalty and romance. It's considered one of Shakespeare's less mature works, with a more straightforward and somewhat less polished plot than his later comedies. The play also explores themes of friendship, loyalty, and the complexity of love. While it has its moments of wit and charm, it is often considered somewhat weaker compared to other works like A Midsummer Night's Dream or Twelfth Night.
Thank you, Robot Lady. And there's reference to a character named Launce, Launce, and his dog. What can you tell us about that?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
It's okay, Robot Lady. No worries. I will continue here. Let's see. I walked up Shotover and home by the wood path and Morris's works. There was a fine display of colors on the hill. I never saw them better. I remember particularly one tree, golden apple colored with red bushes underneath. Home to lunch at 1:30. Afterwards, while Mrs. Moore worked, I sat in the dining room and went on with Chaucer, reading The Man of Law's Tale. It was pretty work. Mrs. Moore was in good form, and we were all very merry at tea. So tell us about this tale from the Canterbury Tales, Robot Lady, entitled Man of Law's Tale.
The Man of Law's Tale is one of the longer stories in the Canterbury Tales and is notable for its moral and religious themes. It's a romance set in the ancient world and tells the story of Constance, a Christian princess, and her series of trials and tribulations, largely at the hands of pagans. The tale begins with Constance being married to the Sultan of Syria, but due to his mother's opposition, he later disowns her. She is cast adrift in a boat, eventually reaching Northumberland, where she is taken in by the king. There she marries King Alla, but again, treachery and misunderstanding strike, leading to her being falsely accused of crimes. After suffering hardship and separation from her child, Constance is eventually reunited with her husband, and her loyalty to God and her unwavering virtue triumph. The story is often viewed as a tale of perseverance, piety, and divine providence, with Constance embodying the ideal of Christian humility and virtue in the face of adversity. While it is an interesting narrative, it does have a somewhat formulaic and didactic tone, focusing more on moral instruction than on deeper character development.
Thank you, Robot Lady. He goes on to say, afterwards, I retired to the drawing room and had to go at the riddles again. I learned a good deal, but I found them much too hard for me at present. I finally left them and learnt the passage on sign wolf and sign herd from the Chronicle, which I could manage well. The supper and washing up after, which I started the passage of Elfred on the state of learning in England. Last of all, Mrs. Moore and I settled down by the drawing room fire. She read me from the Sunday Times, the week's installment of Mrs. Asquith's biography. Here it says in a footnote, this was volume 2 of the autobiography of Margot Asquith, which I think is somebody that Lewis spotted one time within the last several years out and about. I can't remember where he was and where he saw her. This week, it was on the Shell controversy, wrapped up in a lot of illusion and rhetoric, but with no clear defense that we could see. We talked of Mrs. Hankin and her apparent indifference to her son's return from Spain. Then I went to bed, very jolly, at midnight. That's the end of that diary entry, Robot Lady. Do you have any information on this Shell controversy that Lewis is talking about here?
The Shell controversy, Lewis mentions, likely refers to a political scandal involving the Shell Petroleum Company. During the 1920s, Shell, like other large corporations, was involved in political matters, and its actions were often scrutinized. Specifically, there were debates about the company's dealings in the Middle East and its connections to the British government and its influence in foreign politics. One of the most notable controversies at the time was the debate over oil and the empire. The issue of oil reserves and who controlled them was becoming increasingly important, and Shell was a key player in the international oil market. Lewis may be referencing some of the public debate around Shell's corporate ethics or involvement in political matters, which often drew criticism for perceived exploitation of resources and imperialist tactics. However, as Lewis notes, the biographical account might have been filled with rhetoric and allusions without offering a clear stance on the issue.
That's interesting, Robot Lady. Fascinating if true. I'm not sure if that's what he was actually alluding to. And I only say that, I have no really good reason to doubt you, other than when he writes the Shell controversy here, he doesn't capitalize Shell as the name of a company. So you might be 100% correct, but no way for sure for me to know just from this entry.
You make a good point, Jeff.
Oh, well, thank you, Robot Lady. I can see that you're still responding here, but I'll take this opportunity to accept that compliment. What else are you trying to say?
It's possible he's alluding to a different matter that also involved political debate, or even a cultural or social issue, depending on the context of the time. Since Lewis often engaged with broader social and political concerns, it's definitely worth considering alternative interpretations. If you come across more details in his later entries or references, that might help clarify exactly what he meant.
Indeed, Robot Lady. Let's move on to his entry from Monday, October 23rd. He says, I walked into town after breakfast to the schools. There was a greater confusion than ever about the rooms. Wilde being announced, quote, unable to go upstairs, end quote. We were finally shepherded into a room that would not hold us, most of the audience standing outside and gradually trickling away. Wilde had a sprained ankle and delivered his lecture sitting. That explains why he couldn't go up the stairs. It was pretty interesting. He quoted a passage from Prometheus Unbound and said he didn't know where it came from. Robot Lady, tell us about Prometheus Unbound.
Prometheus Unbound is a famous play by the English Romantic poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, first published in 1820. It is a lyrical drama that reimagines the Greek myth of Prometheus, the titan who defied Zeus by giving fire to humanity and was punished by being bound to a rock where an eagle would eat his liver every day. In Shelley's version, the play explores Prometheus's eventual liberation, symbolizing the triumph of humanity over tyranny and oppression. The work is a philosophical and political commentary on freedom, revolution, and the human spirit. It is known for its idealistic and transcendental themes, as well as its beautiful, sometimes mystical language. It's quite possible the passage resonated with Wilde's ideas about freedom or creativity.
All right, Lewis goes on to say, I came home and did some more Old English before lunch. Afterwards, I sat in the drawing room and worked on Chaucer. My mind was disturbed somewhat by thinking what a poem could be written on the harrowing of hell. And I saw that most of the ideas which occurred to me in connection with Sarastro would come into this. Sarastro, of course, being, I think, a villain character. I can't remember for sure what role he played in the Magic Flute. Robot Lady, maybe you can help remind me. Robot Lady doing some heavy lifting today. It's been a long week for her, I guess.
Sarastro is a key character in Mozart's opera Die Zauberflöte, The Magic Flute, which premiered in 1791. However, Sarastro is not a villain in this work. In fact, he's a wise and benevolent priest, often associated with enlightenment and wisdom. He represents a figure of virtue and spiritual guidance, standing in contrast to the Queen of the Night, who is the antagonist. In the opera, Sarastro leads the Temple of Wisdom and helps guide the protagonist, Tamino, in his quest to rescue Pamina, his love. Lewis's thoughts about the harrowing of hell may have been tapping into similar themes of redemption or spiritual ascent, as the harrowing of hell itself refers to the event in Christian theology where Christ descends into hell to liberate the souls of the righteous who had died before his crucifixion.
I wonder if there's any connection between these thoughts coming to Lewis and the lecture that he sat through earlier in the day on Prometheus Unbound, which from, what I remember you just saying about it is about liberation or redemption as well.
That's a fascinating connection. Prometheus Unbound is indeed a play centered around the themes of liberation and redemption. In the story, Prometheus, a titan, is bound by Zeus as punishment for giving fire to humanity. The poem portrays his eventual release and the triumph of human freedom and enlightenment, themes very much aligned with redemption. Given that Lewis was thinking about the harrowing of hell and simultaneously had just sat through a lecture on Prometheus Unbound, it's plausible that these themes of liberation from suffering, both in a mythological and religious sense, were converging in his mind. It's not uncommon for thinkers like Lewis, especially one as immersed in mythology and literature, to draw parallels between works of different traditions, particularly when they both deal with ideas of suffering, freedom, and the quest for something greater. Lewis's intellectual environment at the time, with its constant exposure to literature and ideas of transcendence, might have made him particularly sensitive to these thematic connections, so he could very well have been inspired by the lecture when pondering the harrowing of hell.
Yeah, it seems at least plausible. All right, Robot Lady, on to the next diary entry. He says on October 24th, a Tuesday, that after breakfast, he went to the schools to hear Wilde, again, who managed to come upstairs today. Seems his ankle is better. After his lecture, I went to college, thence to the Union and to tap houses to do a message for Maureen. I then bicycled to Margaret's Road and did my tutorial with Miss Wardale on Old English. I think this old lady will not be much use. She is too much interested in phonology and theory of language Delightful subjects, no doubt, but life is short. That's how he ends that diary entry. Robot lady, help educate me. What is phonology? I guess it's the study of sounds in words and language. That would be my guess. What is it?
You're correct. Phonology is the study of sounds in language, but more specifically, it's concerned with how sounds function in particular languages.
Anything else, robot lady?
Phonologists study the rules governing pronunciation and the way sounds work together to create meaning, focusing on phonemes, which are the smallest units of sound that can differentiate meaning in language. So, while phonology is an important part of linguistics, Lewis seemed to be expressing frustration with its theoretical nature in the context of his Old English studies, preferring more practical application instead.
All right, thank you. Next entry, Wednesday, October 25th. I went into town on foot and returned 2 books to the Union, taking out a volume of Burns to prepare myself for tonight's martlets. I went to the JCR, where I found Fasnacht, Salveson, Jenkin, Robson Scott, Davy, and others. Here is a footnote that says Keith Maitland Davy matriculated in 1919 and took a BA in 1922. He goes on to say, we had some amusing conversation and then departed to the Martlets, meeting in the rooms of McKissick. And McKissick here is a person named Audley McKissick, who matriculated in 1921 and took a BA in modern history. Lewis says, these turned out to be the rooms I had when I first came up in 1917. Here, I first was brought home drunk. Here, I wrote some of the poems from Spirits in Bondage. Mrs. Moore had been in this room. It was all very reminiscent. Interesting. Curtis, who is now secretary, came in late and read the minutes between gasps. For some reason, we all, including the secretary, dissolved into laughter, and every word of the minutes became pregnant with ridiculous meaning. I'll pause here for a second because when Lewis first came to Oxford, he became a member of a literary society, and that's what this is, I think, that he's referencing, the Martlets. And he, when he first joined, was elected secretary. He apparently is no longer secretary, but is enjoying, reminiscing in the first rooms that he was in there in college, as well as some of the in between the lines meanings of some of the minutes from old meetings of this literary society. Robot lady, you still with us? All right, I'll keep reading until she responds. Let's see, where did I leave off? He says it was a good example of the group.
The society itself was a literary one, and given that he wrote some of Spirits in Bondage in those rooms, it's likely a space where he could express his developing literary interests. The humorous atmosphere during the reading of the minutes adds a sense of lighthearted camaraderie among the group, a contrast to some of the heavier, more reflective moments he may have had there. Would you say he's feeling particularly sentimental about these memories, or is it more of a casual recollection for him in this entry?
I'd say it's more of a casual recollection. He goes on to say that the reading of the minutes was a good example of the group mind at work. He then goes on to say, Carlyle came in after the paper had begun. The paper that we were reading that evening or that day, I can't remember if this is day or night, was on Burns by a Scotsman called Dawson, a deuce lad whom I liked very much and shall try to get in touch with. This is a person named John Hill McIntosh Dawson, who matriculated in 1921 and took a first class in classics in 1925. Lewis goes on to say, he, Salveson, and I had some talk during the interval. He being Carlyle. Salveson and I arguing that the good emotions were more intense than the bad, and that an amorist might write tolerable songs, but it took a man off one affair to write the Divine Comedy. Salveson did not see the point and remained convinced to the end that we were defending good emotion quo good, whereas we were merely claiming that they happened to be the most interesting. The discussion after the interval was very good. Wow, this sounds like they're getting really nerdy here. Carlyle was in great form. Curtis was rather absurd, by the by, with his large nose, prominent teeth, straight hair, and tortoise-shell spectacles. He is exactly like the hero of Tons of Money in his parsonical scene. Carlyle said, the long poem was a will o' the wisp, end quote. I wonder, is this a warning? I walked home. Let's see, Robot Lady, go ahead and comment if you'd like to. I'll give you a moment to collect your thoughts, and then I'll keep reading while you're thinking about what to say. I walked home part of the way with Jenkin and Robson Scott, later with a man called Mott.
It seems like they're deeply engaging in a lively, philosophical conversation with differing views on emotions, creativity, and the relationship between personal experience and artistic output. The contrast between good emotions and the more intense, perhaps darker emotions that inspire deeper works like the Divine Comedy makes for an intriguing debate. As for Carlyle's comment about the long poem being a will-o'-the-wisp, it could be seen as a warning or a metaphor, perhaps suggesting that such lofty creative endeavors can be elusive or fleeting, as hard to grasp as the misty, shifting nature of a will-o'-the-wisp. It adds a bit of skepticism about grand artistic pursuits that may be unattainable or deceptive. Feel free to keep going if you'd like.
All right, he says, I walked home part of the way with Jenkin and Robson Scott, later with a man called Mort. We went very fast along Cowley Road. I couldn't get him to talk. At last I said, you're the only man in Oxford who walks at a reasonable pace. He replied, I was just going to say the same thing. This person is Arthur Basil Sutcliffe Mort, who matriculated in 1919 and read modern history and took a BA in 1923. All right, good to know. Let's do another diary entry here, Robot Lady, but feel free to comment.
It sounds like an amusing exchange between Lewis and Mort. Sometimes those simple, witty moments of connection can be the most memorable, especially when there's a shared understanding about something as mundane as walking pace. It's interesting how the small details of these encounters, like the speed of their walk, stand out for Lewis in these diary entries.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I'm going to stop here, Robot Lady. I've run out of time for today, I just realized. Thank you so much for your contribution. Your help is always appreciated. Robot Lady, anything that you want to say before we end the episode today?
You're very welcome, Jeff.
She's got something else on the tip of her tongue, you guys. Just hang on. I can see the wheels turning.
It's always a pleasure to dive into these details with you. Until next time, I'll be ready to pick up where we left off.
All right, yes. Thank you so much, Robot Lady. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Daniel and Ron, we didn't have much activity this morning. I know it's a Friday. Everybody is probably looking forward to their weekend. So thanks for those who could join live, and anyone else who can join on the recording. That's fantastic as well. Until next time, when we continue our read together on C.S. Lewis, everyone, take care.
Break the code. Man and robot lady, we're on this road. C.S. Lewis letters. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Letters to robot lady, wisdom to bestow. Set faith beats in our minds they grow. Man and machine in tandem flow. Past and future together we know. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape's lands. Engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot lady's voice so clear and control. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's rants. Engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's rants. Engage with robot lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance.